Captain's Log Supplemental. En route to our next mission on the edge of known space, we encountered a vessel of unknown design. Scanners picked up no signs of life, so I ordered an away team to investigate the ghost ship to see if we could determine its origin. Once there, Commander Lee noted that there were eerie sounds echoing throughout the ship. Some of the more superstitious crew suggested the ship may even be haunted. As the away team pushed further into the ship, the eerie sound began to increase in volume. Before some of the away team began to lose their nerve, they happened upon the source of the noise. It turns out that the vessel belonged to something of a long-haul transporter. The alien had gone into some type of deep hibernation midway through their journey and was very upset to be awoken by the away team. It seems the aliens' vital signs were so low in their hibernation state that the sensors missed them completely. Hopefully I will be at least half that asleep tonight.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Captain's Log Supplemental. My name is Stanford. I am joined by Rob.
Hello.
And Chris.
Hey there, folks.
We are a Star Trek rewatch podcast. We're going through in chronological order, so we are still suffering with Enterprise. Oh, that reminds me, actually. So we're still pretty new at this whole podcasting thing. This is episode 13, which, frankly, that's kind of impressive, if I do say so myself. It would be very helpful if you would go out and give us a rating, give us a review, any of those things. But also, there isn't a great way to have podcasts advertised to you. So if you could just tell your friends to come listen, that would be awesome. We'll also totally take some shameless plugging on, Reddit, Star Trek boards or whatever. Like, we're not going to do it ourselves because that's tacky, but we will totally ask other people to do it for us without any shame whatsoever. But I did want to say that we actually have a review.
Like a real review?
Apparently on Podcast Addict, you can leave reviews.
Okay.
So a user by the name of Led Zappa left us a 5-star review.
Nice.
And he says, quote, out of all the Star Trek podcasts, this is definitely one of them.
Truth facts right there.
Thanks, Zappa. Thanks. Appreciate that so much. So yes, nothing but facts. So today's episode is episode 13 of Star Trek Enterprise. It is entitled Dear Doctor. And just before we start, let me say that this is one of those episodes where it follows like a B character around. For the whole episode. There's one of these pretty much every series at some point, and they're usually the best episodes out of that show.
Yes, I agree. A lot of times that is very true. There's like a Data one in TNG that comes to mind that I very much enjoy that is very similar.
Yes, Voyager has a couple, I think, like Doctor specific ones, and Picardo can really hold his own, so that comes out pretty well. So the episode starts with a cold open of the Doctor basically coming into the sickbay, turning on the lights and starting his day. The first thing he does is feed his entire menagerie of animals, which seems like surprisingly dangerous. He looks like he's about to be bitten by pretty much everything he feeds.
Well, at least he gets a little snack at the end, though.
He does. He's going to munch on some of the grub that he feeds his bat. I think it's his bat.
He has a very open palate, Phlox does.
Yes. It's actually a pretty quick little open, and we go into some Faith of the Heart. And then we get into the narrative framework of this particular episode, which is Phlox dictating a letter that he is writing to a kind of scientific pen pal, because he and his buddy are in the interspecies medical exchange, which is... That's kind of cool. I'm not going to lie. That's pretty awesome, actually.
Yeah, I thought that was a pretty neat concept.
It is, especially, they're trying to promote interspecies relationships. I feel like that's a really effective way to, get people involved with other people in their field.
Absolutely. And that is why the episode is called Dear Doctor, because it starts each entry with Dear Doctor so-and-so or Dear Dr. Phlox. The friend that Phlox is writing to, I guess, is working on his home world. Denobula, I think is the name of it.
Yep.
And I don't know why the writers of Star Trek always feel the need to do this, but like nobody in Star Trek except for humans fuck like humans. Everybody else has some kind of weird ass mating season or the ponfar or stick their hand in a bowl of rocks. Like no one just has sex unless you're a human. So of course,
no. That's not true. Oh, okay. I guess it's partially true. Like their mating things are their own thing, but they are more than happy to bang humans the human way all day long.
Oh, sure. I'm not going to kink shame the aliens. It's just like their actual mating practices are always weird. And in the case of the Genobulans, I guess they have like a mating season where the clinics turn into just free-for-alls because everyone's too busy fighting and fucking.
Yeah, I mean, sure. That sounds like a good time.
And because this show is the horniest show ever, there's like substantial screen time paid to like him describing this.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta get the people in, and you know that's what they want. Just some audio alien bang scenes is basically that's it. That's what draws the crowds in.
The first patient that Phlox treats in this episode is the goodest boy on the ship, Porthos. Archer needs to stop feeding him people food. Stop giving the dog people food.
Specifically cheese.
Knock it off.
Giving him the squirts.
So then we kind of get to this interesting scene where Phlox is, I guess, on like a date.
I don't know if it's a date yet. At that point, they just seem to be spending time together because I got the impression that Phlox was not aware of the romantic intentions of Cutler. Another crewman.
Yes, I did note that as well. Apparently Star Trek Enterprise is where all the crewmen are. Yeah. Cutler definitely wants it to be a date, whether or not Phlox kind of was on board at first.
Mm-hmm.
I find it interesting. This is just a little observation. People shush each other in movie theaters way more often in shows and movies than in real life.
Right. Yes,
like
100% accurate.
They're having a tiny little conversation and someone will be shh. Like, Jesus Christ. Tucker is, of course, the best character in the world. He is bawling like a little baby, and it's adorable.
It was great. It was so good.
I don't know what movie they were watching.
I was trying to figure it out, but I couldn't.
It is some kind of classic film. Right. Oh my God, that reminds me. Like a few minutes ago, my son was telling me a story, and he goes, I looked around and there were no cars. There were just horses pulling buggies. I must have gone back in time to 1958.
Oh boy.
And I'm like, hey buddy.
Oh boy.
We had cars in 1958. He's like, I mean 1873. Well, I mean, we as a species.
I like how his first reaction is just, let's just jump back another half a century. We'll get there eventually.
Yeah.
Well, it's always a little heart murdering when my child describes like something from like the 90s as really old. So, like, oh, this show's so old.
I've been having Voyager on, and it's in the old 4:3 fucking aspect ratio.
Uh-huh.
Oh man, that makes everything so old looking.
It really does.
So at the end of the evening, Cutler gives Phlox a little kissy poo, and Phlox is like, all right, I guess this is happening. And then we cut back to the bridge where the Enterprise has apparently come across some random ship, and this is going to be kind of the A plot here.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting that they started out with like so much of the B plot.
Mm-hmm.
Like there was a large section of the beginning devoted to the B plot.
Well, and I think again,
I guess that's because of the narrative structure of it.
Right. But that's the lens show, right? To the Doctor, this is kind of what's happening first, right?
Sure.
They come across a random ship and they're like, it doesn't seem to have a warp drive. What's up with this ship? And then T'Pol's like, there's a planet that's like less than a light year away. And everyone's like, oh, okay. Did they not know that? Like, their sensors are better than that. Why didn't they know that already? I do appreciate in this show that the universal translator is generally not instantaneous.
They just seem to like pick and choose when they like show that part happening, though.
That's
like,
true.
There's definitely some where they're just like, oh, it's working right away. Okay.
Right. But they find a couple of dudes on the ship. They are sick and in some kind of hibernation. The doctor wakes them up. This dude is the chillest alien ever because he gets woken up on some like alien ship and he's like, yo, what's up? And that's pretty much his entire reaction.
Yep. I thought it was very calm.
Turns out that he is sick with some kind of chronic disease. And he's like, we're out here looking for help from passing warp ships, indicating that they obviously know what a warp ship is. And Phlox is like, yeah, you're definitely sick. He mentions a couple of races that they have come in contact with before. One of them I didn't recognize, but the second one was the Ferengi.
Right.
Yeah, man.
Which is interesting because this is the first mention of them in the Star Trek timeline then.
Yeah.
I was really surprised when T'Pol said that the Vulcans hadn't encountered them yet.
They hadn't.
I
also wasn't sure if T'Pol was lying, although technically Vulcans aren't supposed to lie, so there was just kind of a weird pause there that made it sound kind of like a lie. But if I recall the TNG episode correctly, the Vulcans had also not met the Ferengi yet.
No, for sure. Yeah. Like, I find it interesting. Like, I don't have a good sense of where they are kind of in the Star Trek galaxy, map.
Right. And there isn't a good like diagram that I can find to show where like Ferenginar is in relation to Earth, because I was also like, man, if the fucking NX-01 made it out here to meet someone that the Ferengi had beaten,
right.
They should have met a lot sooner.
Right. Like, what type of like exploration pattern are they? Are they just like straight lining it one direction? Are they like spiraling around Sol, kind of slowly exploring? Like, how is this working exactly?
Right. Yeah, I have no idea. That's a great question that I don't think will ever be answered.
Yeah, probably not. Because then it just locks you into certain things.
Okay, so we cut to Act 2 after the commercial break, and we find that Hoshi is having lunch with the doctor because someone's got to be eaten.
Of course.
And Hoshi is learning Denobulan, which I got to say, this whole scene was kind of fun, actually. I liked it.
Yeah, I enjoyed it, yeah. Mm-hmm.
They had her making some mistakes, but they weren't, like, too goofball off. Yeah. Like, and they weren't too much. It was pretty well done. But Hoshi is the ship's gossip, so she's prying into the doctor's personal life with Cutler.
Right, because she's a woman. Women be talking.
Although, to be fair, Phlox seems like a talker, too.
He's definitely a talker.
That's fair.
So we go to the planet where the doctor, the captain, Hoshi, they're visiting like a clinic where these people are sick. I guess it is determined that the disease probably won't affect the humans and the Denobulan, so they don't seem to give a shit. They go talking about various medical supplies that they can offer, and Hoshi finds a person there that does not speak the same language. She seems weirdly surprised by this because, like, I don't know, what if the dude was just like Spanish? Like right. The Valachian version of like European.
Like that was my first thought too. Like it's weird that they're so surprised about the idea of different languages. Because like, was it on this show or maybe it was Discovery or even Strange New Worlds? Like you realize that all of the people aboard the ship were speaking different languages, but the translator was just auto-correcting it for anyone listening in.
I think that was Discovery actually.
Was it Discovery? Okay.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that was in Discovery, which opened up a whole other batch of questions for me, but we'll touch on that whenever we get to that episode.
Yeah, I think it's understood that there's like a Starfleet standard language, which is English because it's an American TV show. But Archer, so the doctor is like, "Hey, Archer, like we could use your help here." Doctor's like, we could really use your help. Archer's like, we'll do whatever we can. And the doctor's like, we could use that warp drive you got there. That's pretty handy because that could let us find some people. And Archer's like, I'll think about it. But he goes to talk to T'Pol about it. And this is going to be red flag number 1. The direct quote from T'Pol is, "Your experience with lesser civilizations is limited, Captain. You'd be surprised what a temptation our technology can be." We're gonna put a pin in that. Because that's, like I said, that's red flag number 1.
What, the lesser civilizations part?
Yeah. This is going to get real problematic real fast. Okay, so we find out that the person who speaks a different language is something called a Menk. Now, it is not clear in this scene that the Menk are not just like, again,
An offshoot.
like the word European, right? He's just like, oh, that's a Menk. They speak Menk. It's like, oh, that's a European. He speaks French or whatever, you know? But like, okay. But the implication is that they are treated as second-class citizens, although we're not actually told that. But this one just seems to be kind of helping out around the clinic. This is the second part of, this is the primary kind of interesting philosophical thing that they talk about in this episode. The Menk are a different species of humanoid that live on the same planet that came up with them. They are, according to the science, and this is I'm having a hard time talking about some of this because of how white I am. According to the science, they are a lesser evolved species. So they are not a different race of like the same humanoid. They are a completely separate species.
Which that's how I understood it as well. But also, they look like super close to the other aliens
They do.
as
They
well.
look pretty much
do.
the same.
Yeah, apparently this planet rolled the syncretic evolution start in Stellaris.
The kind of analogy that is used later is like, think of them like the Neanderthal, like they're similar but not the same, and that they are in a different stage in their evolutionary journey. Okay. We'll get back to that because we cut back to the ship where the doctor is running some tests on some of the samples he got from the planet. And then T'Pol is apparently coming in for some kind of dental exam, and she is fucking furious with the fact that her teeth are not like quite perfect. Yeah.
By the way,
See,
I think we, real quick, I think we forgot to mention in the other scene, we do discover that the Menk are immune to the disease as well.
I'm sorry. That was such a standard thing. I forgot to actually take that note down because like, that's just, yes. So the Menk, I think this is where that scene is where we discover that the disease is actually a genetic disorder.
Right.
That is plaguing the Valakians and does not seem to be affecting the Menk at all.
Yeah. It was, the scene with T'Pol though was great. I don't think she was mad, or at least I didn't interpret it that way. I think she was scared. Like, I think they were playing on the fact that, you know, the stalwart science Vulcan, like, is terrified of the dentist.
I agree with that being the kind of intent of the scene.
Yes. I do, and I agree with you there, mostly because of the way they did the, you know, dentist talking to his patient joke.
Right.
You know, gets his fingers in your mouth and then asks you questions. Like, I'm like, okay, this is clearly like, you know, your quintessential patient afraid of dentist scene.
Yeah, I think it was like an attempt to humanize both of them and make them less alien.
Sure.
And if I can be vulnerable for a minute here, I fucking hate the dentist. I'm so bad. But if the dentist was this easy, I'd be all fucking for it.
Right.
However, Phlox asks T'Pol's advice about interspecies relationships because of Cutler. And she says back to him, humans lack the emotional maturity for interspecies relationships, which is like the Vulcan way of saying like, humans, yeah, they just want to fuck. Like they're not really up for understanding culture. They just got kinks.
I took it as her saying the humans are just all about that drama.
Which from a Vulcan is
right.
a real low bar.
Right.
Yes. So pandemic is a genetic issue. Okay. So next act after the exciting commercial break, we are now in a Menk camp that Phlox and Cutler and Hoshi are visiting to collect samples from the Menk because Phlox thinks that they may be a key to figuring out what this issue is and maybe providing some kind of insight or cure to this particular pandemic. We don't get a sense of why the Menk live in like huts. They tell us that they live here because it's kind of like a reservation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like, I don't really see why they have to live in huts.
I think that was purely just a tool to show you that they were quote unquote less evolved.
I guess. Because, like, the one dude works in a hospital. Like, he knows what a building is, you know?
I agree. I just, like I said, I think it was just a tool to show you that they were supposed to be less evolved.
So the Menk reveal that they do not live in, like, the nice fertile land where they can grow good food, but the Valakians do supply them with everything they need, and as far as the Menk are able to communicate, they seem happy with the arrangement, or at least they feel like the Valakians are taking good care of them. Now, I don't understand why the universal translator can't translate Menk. It's just a language. Hoshi figured it out pretty quick.
Yeah. Well, like the idea behind the way that, you know, this particular generation's translator works, right, is it needs a certain amount of input, and then it kind of figures out from context, I guess, how to extrapolate the rest of a language. So, like, even if it couldn't understand it at first, like, yeah, that would be a little surprising after you've been talking with other people on the same planet, maybe. Like, if you live in a universe where everybody just kind of unifies on a planet by the time someone else finds them. But, like,
right. Now,
it's weird that it couldn't eventually pick it up, you know?
Right, and I'm wondering if the implication was supposed to be that their language was, like, too simple for the universal translator. Which doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I agree with you, but I also think that was the intent.
But also, that's not how language works. Like, I don't know. Anyways, they're taking all these samples. A Menk aide that is helping Dr. Phlox, the one who I believe works at the hospital, impresses Phlox by, like, simply organizing things. Phlox is very easily impressed by these people.
Yeah, well, and I think that's, you know, your way to demonstrate that maybe they're not as, you know, unevolved as the whatever they're called, the other people. I can't remember.
The Valakians.
Valakians, yes. Their name is much more complicated.
Also, to be fair, Phlox is also easily impressed by humans.
Yeah.
Yep, that's true.
He and Cutler talk about the future of their relationship. Denobulans are apparently strict polygamists. Like, he's got 3 wives, and each of them has 3 husbands, including him. It's like a whole polycule kind of dealio. Cutler's like, whoa, I don't want to get married. I just want a bone. So she's like, maybe we could just be friends. Sometimes kind of have sex sometimes. And Phlox is like, all right, that sounds good.
she's very not specific about what she was interested in.
Yeah,
to the alien who has trouble understanding human cues.
Right. Let's just see where it goes. And Phlox his face says, what does that mean?
We cut back to Archer talking to the original sick guy that they picked up out of space who is not doing well. And that guy's like, yo, dude, we could really use your warp technology. Because, like, he's like, you may not be able to help us with this disease, but if you give us your warp drive, or at least like a warp ship, we could maybe find someone that, you know, can help us. And Archer says, you may not find that everyone you meet wants to help you. And the sick dude's like, still, we have to try, which is a good fucking point.
It's like, yeah, we're dying, so...
Yeah, like, what's the difference? We're gonna die. I might as well get some help or, you know, risk dying quicker. What's the difference? We cut back to the Enterprise, and we are given kind of what I would call, like, red flag number 2 here, where there's a lot of... So the Enterprise is receiving hails from all over the planet because they want, like, medical aid, because there's a rumor going around the planet that the Enterprise just has the cure, which they do not. This is treated as a bad thing, or bad's the wrong word. This is treated as like a look at these simple-minded people who are just constantly contacting us. That's what we're dealing with. And T'Pol is completely unamused by this. Archer's like, well, maybe we should give him the warp engine. And T'Pol is like, that's not a great idea. Even if you, and this is the quote, even if you give them our reactor schematics, they don't have the technological expertise to build a warp engine. I believe she was actually quoting Bill Gates about the COVID vaccines right there. And then, she's like, antimatter. And Archer's like, they have no experience working with antimatter. I doubt they even know how dangerous it is. Fuck you. Because first, yes, they do. these people are more technologically advanced than we are. Like we human beings on Earth in 2023, these people are more technologically advanced than us. Like we know how dangerous antimatter is. We can't make it, so it's not like a danger that matters. But we understand that if antimatter touches matter, it explodes. I know we understand this because we've got a whole set of fiction that works like that. Mm-hmm. And second of all, just because they haven't worked with it yet doesn't mean they can't understand the danger of something. I'm not a particle engineer, but I know not to stick my hand in the Hadron Collider. Like, I understand what dangerous means.
I just had a mental image of like the Peter Griffin like thing with the fan, and he's sticking his dick in it, except it's you and a Hadron Collider.
And then Archer very pointedly says, like, we could stay and help them. And T'Pol is like, the Vulcans stayed to help you, and we're still here, and it's been 90 years. Okay, 90 years is not that long. As really, really not. For like a long-term scientific cooperative, 90 years is not that long. But also, like, okay, it can save lives, so does that matter at all? Maybe not. We're gonna talk about this a little more. Archer says, I'm beginning to understand how the Vulcans must have felt, that I guess helping people was just too inconvenient.
Yes, that is the main sentiment.
But at the end of this act, Phlox discovers the cure. And we go to commercial break. So we come back to Phlox and Archer having a late night snack drink. Actually, Archer was drinking. And talking about the ethics of genetic processes. This whole conversation starts to feel a little eugenicsy pretty quick.
Yeah, you got that too, huh?
Because there's discussion of like, well, there's two sets of genetic lines, the Menk and the Valachians. And the Valachian genetic code is not good enough to survive naturally. And Phlox is like, but if we step in and interfere, that's interfering with nature, which is a different discussion.
Bitch, you're a doctor.
Right. Which was a good point that Archer made. Archer made that point. And Phlox is like, meh.
Yeah. Like, I can't believe I'm agreeing with Captain Archer right now.
Right. And, yeah, but basically saying that like the Menk's genetic code is better built to survive, so therefore they deserve to survive instead of the other ones is like a textbook definition for eugenics. Now, yeah. I understand it's a little different because these are two separate species as opposed to like the same species, but it's still eugenics when you consider that they're both sentient. And the doctor, and so the doctor are like, maybe the Menk will do better if the Valachians are out of the way. And he says, quote, if the Menk are to flourish, they need an opportunity to survive on their own. Why? Didn't you just say that they're evolving like right now? They're right now going through an evolutionary renaissance. Well, what's different about now?
And not to mention, I mean, there's plenty of evidence in human nature that shows species can evolve symbiotically and thrive together. They don't have to be separate.
Sure. And I'm not sure what the theoretical benefit of letting the Menk or letting the Valachians die so that the Menk can just be there from the Menk perspective. And this is where the show tries to use this like reservation second-class citizen thing to kind of make the Valachians feel evil so that we can justify killing them. In the same way that like Marvel does that with their good villains. It's like Killmonger's got a lot of good points up until he decides to genocide everybody. Like, God damn it.
All of this, like, oh man, it felt so weird the way that they contrived all of this. And then they tried to oversimplify the like philosophical morality behind the decisions that they were about to make.
Right.
I don't know. This was rough.
It was a little rough.
Well, part of the problem I had with it is Archer says, no, I'm going to give it to him. And then, like, without any other, and I guess part of it is the narrow structure of the episode, but, like, the next scene, it's like, I changed my mind.
So I have, my note here is, Archer brooded about it all night, realized that he almost made the correct choice, and quickly decided against that shit. Whew, close call.
Yeah, I felt like they gave the wrong opinions to the wrong characters here. Like, if anything, Archer would have been the one to like say, oh no, we got to be hands off, because humanity at this point had already gone through the eugenics wars, right? So like, I could understand them being very hesitant about stepping in and potentially altering the genetic future of a species.
Yeah, I think it would have been a better argument if it was like Phlox and T'Pol having the argument in front of Archer, and Archer just deciding to go with one of them.
Sure.
Because that would make sense. Because T'Pol was very clearly like, do not help them, fuck them. And Phlox is a doctor, so you'd think he'd want to do the most good, right?
You'd think.
Although I will say, I don't want to ascribe human motivations to aliens. So I'm going to give the Phlox and T'Pol kind of a bye, because they are not human, so therefore their motivations are like, they are not driven by the same philosophies we are. I can't ascribe human morality to an alien.
Sure.
Okay, so then Archer is like, we should have a Prime Directive, is basically what he says. He's like, hey, you know that Prime Directive? I'm gonna mention it real quick.
Yeah, I thought that was the wording of or his lines in that were very ham-fisted.
He's like, we didn't come out here to play God. Dude, fuck all the way off.
It was like Prime Directive Mad Libs, like saying anything but the actual word.
Right. Yeah, some kind of directive. All right, we get it.
Wink,
it's like
wink.
Yeah, it's like all the actors turned to the camera and winked at that moment. So then Phlox is like, oh, the doctor decided to not give them the cure. And then he kind of has this narrative overtalk, and he says, and I quote, "If I hadn't trusted him to make the right choice, I'd have been no better than the Vulcan diplomats who held your species back because they felt you couldn't make proper decisions on your own. After which I have in all caps, but all of you just did the exact same thing to the
Right.
Valakians."
Yeah, just totally. They're dying. They don't matter.
I don't know who wrote that line, but the idea that you're simultaneously saying it's ridiculous that the Vulcans are infantilizing the humans, and so therefore I'm not going to infantilize Archer, but he better make the right decision about infantilizing these other species who just hadn't made it to warp yet.
Yep.
Anyways, the episode ends with Phlox, he's definitely going to get it on with Color.
Oh, for sure.
He's going to have a late night snack with her.
Nom, 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 nom.
All right, we're going to be back with a spicy deep dive. So we will be back after this. All right, welcome back. So today for the deep dive, I want to talk about the Prime Directive. And this is something that has been bothering me for a few months now, and I'm glad that I finally got to an episode of this show where I can talk about it. I wanted to start this conversation by saying I understand that the purpose of the Prime Directive in the television show Star Trek is to be countermanded by the characters on the show. It is a writing tool to give them something to kind of like buck against. I get that. Okay. So when I talk about the Prime Directive, I want to talk about it in terms of what it is in the universe. So as if we were in, the Star Trek universe, talking about the ideals of the Prime Directive that theoretically all of Starfleet is supposed to uphold.
Okay.
And I'm pretty sure that I can prove's the wrong word. I'm pretty sure I can adequately support an argument that says that the Prime Directive is a direct descendant of colonial bullshit, and that it is horrifying when you think about any of the implications of the Prime Directive. So that is my thesis, okay? And I found this interesting quote. This quote is from Spock in a short trek. Do you know what the short treks are?
No.
The short treks are a set of short, 15-minute clips that are interspersed around like the Star Trek timeline that are used mostly as marketing material. In this case, this short trek was Spock coming aboard the Enterprise and greeting number 1 from Strange New Worlds, that woman that hangs out with Captain Daddy.
Uh-huh.
I forget her name. I do not remember her name. But anyways, Spock says, have you ever considered that the Prime Directive was not only unethical, but also illogical and perhaps morally indefensible? Which is immediately shrugged off. Like, they immediately changed the subject because obviously some writer knew what was up, but they can't fucking dig into that shit.
Sure.
But the basic tenets of the Prime Directive are as follows. Do not interfere with other civilizations. There's a lot of like subtext in there, and there's a lot of like subsections that get quoted every once in a while, although they're fairly inconsistent. But basically what it means is do not interfere in any way, shape, or form with a civilization that does not have the warp drive. That is the litmus test they use for when a civilization is supposedly qualified enough to be contacted by Starfleet for any reason. Okay. Do y'all know why the warp drive is like that moment?
I assume because that's when the Vulcans contacted the humans.
I was going to say, is it because of first contact? But
So
that came along much later.
So the Vulcans also use this principle, and that is why the Vulcans contacted them during first contact. So we do get it from the Vulcan concept, but do you know why the Vulcans use that criterion?
No.
I vaguely remember some reasoning for this, but I can't remember the details.
Theoretically, and I believe the quote from that supports this comes from that movie, because I believe Riker explains this to Cochrane. Warp drive is used as a litmus test because it is proof that the planet has surpassed its petty differences as like a species or a society and worked together to create something that is basically purely scientific and able to get them to a new frontier. You know, it's no longer stuck in the solar system. We're now able to go faster than light. Crazy.
Absolute bullshit, because the first contact movie proves that was wrong about the humans.
Proves that wrong immediately, because Zephyrin Cochrane's just one dude on a compound of like 100 folk. Like, he doesn't represent the Earth. He doesn't represent shit. He's one dude. And they were still in fear of being attacked by other humans, because what's-her-face, when the Borg bombed them, goes, is it the separatists or whatever? I forget who she quoted.
Right.
As like being the enemy, but like they're clearly still in fear of being attacked by other humans.
Well, there's also the Maquis from Voyager. Like they're clearly not ideologically aligned with Starfleet or Earth for that matter.
The Maquis, as I understand it, were a group of colonists that formed basically into a guerrilla, fighting force. They were offshoots of the Federation, basically.
Yes, so
right,
the Maquis...
That's what I mean. Like, there's clearly like a lack of uniformity among humanity as well.
I see what you're saying, yeah.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. But and I guess like you could theoretically argue that that's the Federation as a whole and not just Earth. But like, yeah, absolutely. So the warp drive is used as this like moment of maturity for a civilization. And prior to that moment, theoretically, Starfleet is not allowed to interfere with that civilization, even if that civilization is in danger. They are not allowed to interfere. There's a quote from Picard, actually, in an episode called Pen Pal, ironically, where he says... basically, like, the Prime Directive exists because humanity has always met with tragedy whenever they've tried to interfere with a civilization, no matter how well-intentioned. First of all, that's not true, because every time it happens in the show, it's not tragedy. It's 100% successful. That's the whole point of the show.
Uh-huh. I mean, it already happened in a previous Enterprise episode, right?
Right. But
yeah,
better question is, why is the warp drive the moment where we decide that a civilization is ready for us to interfere with them? The implication is, if not the outright statement of some episodes, that the point of unification across the planet means that they are beyond such things as like war and infighting and petty squabbling and using technology for horrifying weapons and things like that. But like, if you take that one step further, what they're saying is until a species has sufficiently killed themselves in terrifying ways, they're not ready to not do that anymore.
Sure.
It could also be interpreted a different way. Like one of the reasons why certain tech bros are super obsessed with space travel is they idealize a future where the death of our star doesn't mean the death of us as a people.
Right.
So like maybe it's just the guaranteed continuance of the species past a catastrophic stellar event. I don't know. It's definitely completely arbitrary.
Yes. And I guess like that's kind of my point, is that it is arbitrary. And the way that all of the shows talk about it is it's always couched in this problematic language of calling them primitive species who are not ready for things, which is nonsensical bullshit. To give you like a thought experiment on this, if we had a time machine and we went back to Pompeii and took a baby and brought it to today, and assuming like, let's just say for the sake of this thought experiment that there's no diseases or anything we have to worry about with this baby, but we raise the baby as a modern human.
I shall call him Bill.
Yeah, sure, Bill. Do you think Bill's going to have any trouble being a modern human?
Not if he's raised in the ways of the modern human society.
Okay. That is, Pompeii was what, 1,200 years ago? Longer? It was a while ago. The species that many of the encounters with various Starfleet ships and things are usually like our tech level or maybe a little further back. Starfleet happens in what, the 2300s, 2200s? That's only a couple hundred years. So there's no biological reason that the species isn't ready, right? It's all societal, according to these fucking people.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we have solutions to that. Send people to help them. That's what we do. Like when I don't know if we're the best example, but like when there are peace talks between, actually, I don't want to use the U.S. because the U.S. is a fucking terrifying empire. But when there are peace talks between like two warring factions and a third party country will like host the peace talks and try to like work some shit out, we can do that. The Federation has umpteen billions of people across its stars. Like, we can find people to do this work.
So I think the implication, and it actually makes it worse there, is that we don't want to do that. Right. Exactly. Like,
yeah, and I mean that's definitely Archer's implication. It's like, oh god, 90 years.
Well, I was gonna say this is a perfect example of that in this episode. They're like, yeah, I mean, we could make them like way better, but I just don't got the time for all that nonsense.
Which is fucking ridiculous.
So just to play devil's argument here a little bit, it does make me nervous about the idea that like if we find people in these situations, we should just jump in right away, because what you're talking about helping them advance, that's naturally going to be tainted by what we view as advanced.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, that's
100%.
You could culturally annihilate a people doing something like this.
So I have 2 points about that. One, I do not believe in providing this kind of uplifting without consent. Okay? If the people do not want you to talk to them, they do not want you to help them, then you should respect that. Okay? It's like, hey, we got medicines that can cure every illness you've ever heard of. We've got warp drives that can get you all the way across. It's going to require us to teach you these things and host these schools. We're going to need you to stop letting people die of starvation because we got food. And they're like, no thanks. Then like, you move on. That's how it goes. But the other thing about that is, we already do that in Star Trek, because like what we're saying is, because your point is absolutely valid. If we are there helping their culture uplift technologically, we cannot help but instill our own cultural ideals into them. I don't disagree.
Right.
But by definition, what we're saying is that the warp drive is a good litmus test for when they have unified as a species and have already gotten some of those cultural ideas locked in so that we can welcome them into the fold. So what it ends up being in the end of the day is that what we're saying is instead of allowing us to help them reach the cultural ideals that we want them to reach, we're going to let them die trying without any guidance. And if they make it, then we'll talk to them. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Prime Directive. It doesn't sound like y'all are very much in disagreement with me here, which is awesome. However, I do have one final bit of evidence. Do you know the one substantial situation where the Prime Directive is explicitly suspended? There was a minor thing in the original series that like got kind of mentioned, but was like a line of dialogue and no one really knows how that was supposed to work. So we're going to ignore that one. There's one other thing that is explicitly explored in an episode of a show.
Which show?
Where the Prime Directive is suspended. It happened in Voyager.
Is it if the Borg are invading?
Nope.
I don't know then.
The Omega particle.
I vaguely remember that episode.
So the Omega particle is this fucking molecule that supposedly, if it becomes unstable and explodes, will basically rupture subspace in like a couple of light years around the point of explosion, thereby making warp travel impossible in that region. So the only time that we care about invading or dealing with primitive species is when what they're about to do fucks with our ships.
Sure.
Because bear in mind that these people don't have warp drive. So the only time we care is if they're going to fuck with our military.
Yeah, man.
Fuck that Prime Directive.
Oh, God.
We got to draw a line somewhere, right?
Yeah.
So,
Ours is at the nose of our battleship, okay?
Like, I don't disagree that the Prime Directive often falls short of any real idealistic intentions behind it, but how does this all tie back to colonialism in your mind?
So my issue with the Prime Directive in terms of colonialism is treating uncontacted people or, other civilizations as primitive simply because they do not have the same technology you do, and then therefore infantilizing them. That is a 100% purely colonial attitude. Okay? This is not like we're at war with our neighbor, or we've decided to go to war with our neighbor because we invented a new kind of gun that they hadn't figured out yet, right? This is purely we're going to go to the quote unquote new world, and the indigenous folks don't have three masters and cannons and horses and armor and stuff. So therefore, they're not good enough to be considered people like we are.
This is uncolonized land, right? Like
right. Yes.
It's there. It is a, even if it's not directly said so, they're subhuman. They're not looked at as
right
as the same species.
And they are literally, and not even about the same species, but they're literally saying that there are cultures that exist in the universe that are not as good, that are not as well developed. Regardless of the technological levels, they are literally saying that the culture itself is not mature enough to handle advanced technology. And that is a fundamentally colonialist attitude. Does that make sense?
It does. I'm just like thinking back to our own history. I would not want to give any medieval kingdom a nuclear weapon because they would not hesitate to use it.
Well, okay. So like, I think it's kind of a straw man to suggest that like, you're going to go to a planet and just hand them a bunch of weapons and be like, here's the on switch. Good luck.
Well, that's a good point. Like, you're not providing them weapons. So yeah,
right.
that's kind of a moot point here.
I just say, There was an episode, and maybe it was maybe it was in Voyager, where it was this was another Prime Directive episode where like some representative from some species wants some technology they have, and then they like take them to this holodeck, and like we gave warp drive to this alien species, and they fucked themselves up over the next 20 years with that because they turned it into a bomb. I think is maybe more the thought you were going towards, Rob.
Yeah, like
it is. So two things about that. One is, again, that's theoretically without guidance, right?
Sure.
Yeah, I think that's the real crux of the issue in my mind. I think that if you're there to help them understand the technology and its intended applications, and to help like open their mind to understand that, that's a completely different argument than I'm making, and I would agree with you in that case, Stanford.
The other thing is that I think it is, and again, it's that infantilizing, it's that inherent colonial attitude that we all grew up with, to assume that if you provided a medieval, you're right, if you provided medieval Europe with the ability to make an atomic bomb, those motherfuckers are going to use it because that was medieval Europe. The assumption that all people, when given the technology to feed everyone, clothe everyone, house everyone, provide medicine that will cure any kind of disease that they've ever heard of. And even if you don't give them like a warp drive, just those things like replicators and power sources and stuff, like the assumption that they're immediately going to take that stuff and start shooting each other with it is a Eurocentric attitude that I don't think is fair.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, it even holds less water too because like we've basically said, okay, the reason they don't do this is because they don't want to be involved for X amount of years. But this is, I mean, the Federation for most of its history is basically a post-scarcity society, right?
Absolutely.
Like we have,
I mean, it is still weird that Raffi has to go live in the drug trailer in the middle of the desert when Picard gets to live in this beautiful chateau with 2 servants.
Yep.
I still haven't quite figured out how their society reconciles that structuring in a post-scarcity environment, but like, sure, yes, that is the theory.
Right. So it's pretty much said we're in a post-scarcity society, so there should be no issue with providing resources to manage and guide these societies in the use.
They know how to make Warp 5 ships themselves now.
Yeah,
and I guess to your point from earlier in the episode, Stanford, it isn't fair to assume human morality to an alien species. You're right. Just because they tend to be in a similar age technologically, it doesn't necessarily mean they're in the same headspace culturally that we were at that time.
And I think that's my primary issue is that there's a difference. It's that it's not that the humans are generally isolationist. That's a policy that I don't agree with, but would understand the construction of, okay? Yeah. It's that the humans will only do things to and for species that have passed this arbitrary bar that they set. And that's the problem. Because what you're saying is, because you have a warp drive, your culture is now worth saving. And I think that is a fundamentally problematic attitude.
So it could also be, again, playing devil's advocate here, while we are at a post-scarcity level at this point in Star Trek history, it doesn't necessarily mean that we've got the ship crews to handle that. And they're clearly not trained to do it. I mean, we've seen that with Archer over the last, 13 episodes here.
Sure, maybe at this point in Enterprise. Well, we don't have the Prime Directive at this point in Enterprise, in the Star Trek.
Right.
Although, if you want to talk about this specific episode, the issue is actually not the technology sharing.
It's not.
It's we have a cure to a disease that millions of people are suffering from, but we've decided that this disease is something that they deserve because of their genetic makeup. That is a different kind of philosophical argument, and it's much worse.
Super gross. That's what you're...
Again, I feel like it would have been better handled if they gave any sort of rationale to it. Like if they were like, oh, humanity went through the eugenics war and we've seen the horrors of genetic manipulation and we're not willing to do that. That is a legitimate argument. What they gave in this episode was nothing.
And they tried to make it sound like, well, but the Valakians are abusing the Menk. But like that was a line or two of dialogue out of Phlox about like what the humans kind of thought about the situation.
Right.
There was no actual explanation of how or why that was happening.
They're applying human morality to the
aliens.
The cultural situation of alien species.
Right. And it's also one of those things where it's like, okay, maybe they are. Maybe they are. Maybe they are doing something fundamentally incorrect and immoral to the Menk. Do they deserve to completely get wiped out because of it? Like, is it that evil? They haven't like killed them. And we don't know. We don't know how their society is actually structured. We don't know that when the Menk start showing these awesome abilities, they're not going to be like, fucking hey, let's set up some schools. Let's get them up to speed. Like, we don't know.
I feel like they didn't even give them a chance. They didn't even give them the chance to understand that the Menk were like accelerating in terms of their capabilities, right?
Right. And I mean, to be fair to the Valakians, they've had kind of a lot going on. They may not have had the resources to figure that out.
Right. Yeah, their medical drive is kind of diverted elsewhere at the moment.
It would have been very easy for them to hand off the cure and say, we have put in a word with Starfleet headquarters. They're getting together a team of scientists to come and help you, like, integrate the Menk because of all these awesome things that they're going to be capable of in the next couple generations. Like, that would be fair. You call that a line of dialogue, everyone feels great. But the idea that, like, we can't play God, and therefore we're not going to cure this curable condition that people are suffering from simply because it is a genetic condition.
Which, by the way, I love that it was just like a vial of like red liquid. I forgot to mention that during the episode.
Oh yeah, that's the cure.
It's the cure.
It's just a red liquid.
It's this red liquid in this tiny vial.
So not only do I think that the Prime Directive in and of itself is inherently kind of problematic and morally indefensible, but this specific example for why we quote unquote need a Prime Directive is even more so.
Yeah. I said this wasn't even a good example of it.
Right.
It feels real gross.
And I appreciate that Phlox is a different species, so I'm not going to ascribe human morality to him. But it is very weird to hear a doctor say, well, they deserve to die because that's just how nature intended.
Yeah.
Like, that's a weird thing for a doctor to say.
Yeah. Yeah, you know what? We're just not going to give you those antihypertensives anymore because clearly your veins are trying to kill you. So we're just going to let that take its natural course.
Yeah, here. On Genopula, we cured ALS years ago, but we don't let anyone have it. They can just suffer. Fucking hell. Anyways, that is my deep dive. That went not as long as it could have, but we will be back with Rob's Potpourri right after this.
All right, everybody, welcome back. We're going to wrap up this week's episode with our usual Potpourri segment here. So I thought that we might need something a little more lighthearted after that discussion. So I had planned on something for, a little short and sweet here. But my question to you two this week, if you could pick any career track in Starfleet, what would it be and why?
Oh, man, them's the hard questions right there. Shit.
Yeah.
So, okay, so what are our options? Because this is not something I've got a good solid brain on because I feel like it changes show to show.
So it definitely does. Like even in Strange New Worlds, we saw the cadets going through different tracks, like command track, engineering, medical, science. I think those are the big four that everybody thinks about, but there are clearly others, right? Like you have communications officers. I don't think that they fall under any one of those particular branches per se, at least not that I'm aware of. But basically, like if you could have any job on a Starfleet
that's a different
starship,
question.
What would it
Okay.
be?
Okay. Yeah, because you say like those big four, and like yes, I agree. But then there's like, are the ops guys their own guys? Because ops is definitely a thing. Is
Right, like where does the
security a
chef
track?
fall?
What track are the pilots in? They seem to be command, but also they do something very different than any of the command people, you know?
Yeah.
Oh man. Chris, you
It's
have to
tough,
go first.
right?
Oh, geez. Okay. I would go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, I can go first if it helps.
No, that's fine. I got it.
Okay.
Just going with the kind of gut reaction to the question, I think I would end up something in the engineering path. And mostly that is because I do like to, get into how things work and build things, and in engineering, it seems like that would be the path to do that. Now, whether that ends up being like, ship's engineer or some type of like ship architect or whatever they call them, designer or whatever, but I would probably go that route.
Okay. All right. That's a good answer. I'm going to go ahead and toot my own horn. I'd straight up go command. I think I'd make a fucking awesome captain. Good at delegating, good at thinking on my feet.
No short of confidence.
I'm very confident. I'm also good at working with people, and I'm good at like, I've done project management. I have done leadership positions, both professionally and personally, and have enjoyed that kind of work. And I think that I would be really good at it. And frankly, the thing that I think I would be best at that some Star Trek people are not as good at is trusting people to be their experts. Like the captain asks the head engineer about engineering stuff, and whatever the head engineer says fucking goes because they're the expert. And that's something that I would be very good at.
Yeah, I don't know if it's just like a tool used in Star Trek storytelling. There are so many times where the captain gets a whole bunch of recommendations and just throws them out the freaking airlock.
Ignores them, yeah.
And like there are times when that is okay. Like the captain does need to make a decision, and based on all the information, it's like, I have taken all of your input, I have processed it, and this is my decision. And it may be that like my knowledge, my expertise on this particular incident are important enough that I'm going to be like, sorry, this is what we need to do. It is always interesting to me because like you talk about tracks, Rob, because like command track seems like a thing, but there's also this level of like, there are captains that were not command track at first. Like Janeway was a scientist.
I mean, later on, like, Tuvok is the captain implied he's a captain, I mean, there's lots of examples of that.
Yeah. Like Sulu gets a
Worf.
ship.
Yep. Worf.
Crusher gets a ship.
Yep.
Yeah.
To your point too, I'd actually, for my answer, I'd thought about command, but I feel like I'd be more of like the command in a pinch, because
the understudy. Yeah.
I'm pretty good. No, I'm pretty good with people. I think I would do the same thing you mentioned as far as trusting my experts, but also like when I'm in the moment, I'm good with leadership, but like I don't know if I just want that all the time,
Right. So you'd be like a good senior officer of engineering. Like you'd be a good Geordie LaForge.
Exactly.
He's a department head. Yeah.
So like
you wind up in control of the bridge when everybody else walks out the door.
Exactly.
You're the senior person there.
I'm comfortable making decisions. I'm decisive when I identify the proper path, but I don't want that on my shoulders 100% of the time.
That's funny to me because like Voyager talks about senior officers all the time because like the senior officers are the ones on the bridge, and they're supposedly like department heads, but they're also like the ones on the bridge during like the primary shift, because like there's a whole crew of people that show up in the evenings, but no one likes them.
Right.
But like
because they're eating crackers in the desks and they just leave
there was a
crumbs
discussion between Paris, who is like the pilot, and Torres, who's like the chief engineer. She is explicitly the chief engineer. And they were like, I'm ordering you to such and such. And she's like, you can't order me to do anything. We're the same rank. And he goes, but I'm a bridge officer, so I outrank you. That makes zero fucking sense.
100% bullshit.
And that's not how like military structures are concerned. Like rank matters within your structure, but a person who works for, let's say, Fort Drum and the HQ staff there does not instantly follow the orders of some visiting colonel from some other fort, because he's not in charge of him. Like Torres is in charge of engineering, and all engineers report to her, and she reports to the captain. Just because Paris's station happens to be on the bridge does not make him her superior in any way, shape, or form. And if it's about an engineering question, she actually becomes his superior because that's her fucking job.
Yeah.
So it's very funny how department heading works in Star Trek, because it's like, why is Kim the department head for all of ops on that starship? He's an ensign. Like, he's literally an introductory officer rank. He came out of the academy a few weeks ago, and now he's in charge of a bunch of shit. And like, if you feel like, and then like, well, a bunch of people died or whatever, so maybe he's just next. Okay, then he gets a field promotion. That's literally what a field promotion is.
You know, that's like a whole meme with Voyager, right? Like, Kim never gets promoted.
I know it is. That's what's very funny about it, is that Kim never gets promoted. He's Ensign Kim forever.
Man, I'm excited to see Voyager. You guys talk about it all the time. I feel like I should have just kind of stomached through my initial distaste.
I feel like Stanford has a very positive opinion about Voyager that not a lot of people share. I'm just going to put that out there for you.
Voyager,
Okay.
I will say this. Voyager feels like, amongst the like pulse of the Star Trek community, Voyager feels like kind of like the Star Wars prequels, where like no one liked them and then they started kind of growing on people. It seems like Voyager has kind of grown on people.
I have always enjoyed Voyager. It's not my favorite like it is yours, I think. But I do
as long as we
enjoy it.
don't count lower decks.
Well, sure. Yeah. I mean, I don't, because while it is Star Trek, it's a whole different concept of a show.
But yes, Voyager is probably my favorite if we don't count lower decks. Sorry, Rob. What is your answer to your question?
Oh, no, that's okay. So I originally I was going to go the same way that you were, Chris, and lean engineering. But one thing I've discovered in my professional life, IRL, I work in IT, for those unaware. I really like working specifically where I do now in healthcare IT. It doesn't have all the glitz and glamour of the more corporate IT for sure, but I like knowing what I do is directly helping people.
I like how you described corporate IT as being glitzy and glamorous.
Glitz and glamorous.
You get paid a lot better than I do.
I've seen that meme with like Leonardo DiCaprio as like Gatsby with the champagne.
Yeah, just cheersing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like look how glitzy it is over at fucking Prudential.
Yeah, but for that reason, I think I would go medical.
I can appreciate that.
I can appreciate that, but I'm actually, and that's where like it's a good question. Is there like a medical IT staff in Star Trek, or is that just engineering work?
I don't know. I don't think it would matter to me. I think I would still go into the like a medical career in Starfleet.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe more towards the sciencey part of it than the direct application.
Sure. Like, well, I think there's a part of Star Trek history where the medical officers were science officers. I feel like that was a thing at one point. I don't know if it's still the case.
They all wear blue right there.
It's one of those like uniform things where it's like I don't know that these colors actually matter. Because there's plenty of times where it's like, well, blue is clearly medical. That's Dr. Crusher's wearing blue and she was wearing medical. But then, and like Counselor Troy is blue, but she's a psychologist. She's a counselor. Like, okay, so she's medical. But it's like this random geologist also wears blue because he's science. It's
right.
like, okay, so blue doesn't mean medical. Blue just means not yellow or red.
It's science in some form or capacity, probably. I don't know.
That person sure knows things and might be a doctor.
Right.
Too.
Yellow is like, or golden or whatever color you want to call it is like engineering, but also security.
And it was command at one point.
Yeah.
There's kind of an interesting disconnect there because like the biologists are also scientists and wear blue. So there's like this idea for the writers, like, well, medicine is just a type of science. When like, that's not true. Because medicine involves a whole bunch of shit that is not just, I know how science works. Like, that's like saying like a security officer is just applied physics.
Yeah, like especially if you look at not only the social sciences, but also any sort of, what's the word? Like care management or case management. Like you're delving more into like the overall holistic well-being of a person, the ability for them to take care of themselves once they leave a medical institution, you know?
Right.
But that's still an important part of medicine.
But also you got to get that training, especially in terms of like Starfleet, you got to get that training for like, you know, triage, emergency medicine, and those things where like yes, it's science, but it's also like you have to be trained in this so that you don't freak the fuck out when shit's going down.
Yeah.
All right, so it's settled. Stanford, you're Captain Janeway. I'm Geordi LaForge, and Rob is
what do you want to be, Rob?
Bones, I guess.
But like Kelvin Bones.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh yeah, I would love to be Kelvin Bones.
Kelvin Bones is good stuff. or Chapel from Strange New World. She's pretty cool too.
She is, yeah.
Or Sexy Doctor from Discovery. Oh god, he's so good looking. Sorry, I got distracted thinking about him. I had a point. What was my point?
You have a point now. Yeah.
Man.
You know what the point is? The point is that we have now been posting podcasts live for the last couple of weeks, and the algorithm really likes when you rate us and potentially give us a 5-star rating if you really enjoy what you're hearing this week.
It's a gloriously shameless plug.
Yep.
That was a smooth really transition. I liked it. Yeah.
I was aiming for that perfect segue here. Anyway.
All right, does that wrap our segment then?
Yeah, Rob, do you want to carry us out there? What do you,
I don't know, man.
You're at like the 10-yard line. You're like, nah, I'm done running. Ooh, sports joke. Bam.
Wow, I'm impressed. You never get this.
I don't have a good outro like prepped. I usually have it written down so that I don't stumble over my words. You're going to cut all this, right?
That transition was no, this is fantastic. That transition was off the top of your head.
Yeah, man.
But you can't just say goodbye to everybody like off the cuff. Like that's the panic attack.
Yeah, it's really awful. I have a horrible time ending meetings at work too. It's really
okay.
tough.
Well, then here, we'll do this together, Rob. Ready?
Okay.
All right. I just need you to repeat after me. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Captain's Log Supplemental. You can follow us on Twitter at PodCLS or send us hate mail at podcls3@gmail.com.